said, it's completely unobtrusive. I mean, you wouldn't know it's there. It's not like you got a big hulking thing in the baggage compartment. You don't have a big handle hanging down right here. It's just very nicely sort of hidden away.
Yep, and it's obviously produced in all of our factory aircraft. It's installed through the factory. That's a nice thing to have, again.
Are there any particular limitations? Obviously, when you have an emergency, you have to use it, but any particular considerations that one may have in mind before you deploy the parachute?
It does recommend that you're at 133 knots or maneuvering speed before your deployment. Obviously, that depends on the scenario or the situation. Certain scenarios, warrant that, and others won't. So basically, it's all about pilot judgment. Using good pilot judgment, and that's something that should be instilled with you at the beginning.
The old rule of thumb is follow the rules if you plan on flying the airplane again, but if you don't, forget the rules.
There you go. That's it. That's it in a nutshell.
The other thing I want to talk about is just I noticed when we were flying that when you were doing some of the slow flight, and the aircraft was very responsive in some of the turns that you probably want to do some other aircraft out there. Very responsive. You talked a little bit about the overall aerodynamic principle behind that. Can you explain a little bit of why is it you were able to do the maneuvers you did, and within a great envelope of safety there?
You bet. Well, what's going on with the wing design is obviously it's a NASA form design. And what's happening here is you have two angle of attacks going on. Within the wing root, at that slow flight speed or just above, you're going to stall at the wing root where you want to stall. And what's going to happen is that at the wing tips, you're still going to have complete control effectiveness of the aircraft. So when you do get into the slow flight configurations, obviously a scenario for that would be your approach to landing or even your takeoff scenario. So at your slow flight situations, you want that effectiveness. You noticed when we did the flight itself, we got into our slow flight minimum controllable airspeed, and what would normally take just very shallow, gentle turns, obviously anything more than that in certain aircraft, and there's a good chance for a stall. Not a bad thing, you just go through a stall recovery. That's what you're trained for. But it's a beautiful thing to know that when you get into this aircraft and you actually get into that same scenario, you have such good control effectiveness of this aircraft that you can bring this aircraft around in 45-degree banking turns and bring it back and forth, and it has complete control effectiveness and good flight characteristics at those slow speeds. Where obviously that example of your base to final, that classic stall spin scenario base to final, you would really have to be in a really not so good situation to make that happen. I mean, everybody pretty much had a good feeling or saw a pretty good example of what this airplane does.
We did lose just a couple hundred feet. I was wondering if that had us on the back end of the power curve? Or
that's all that was, is we just started, we were obviously in the back end of the power curve at that point already, bringing the power in, and that would have just been a simple adjustment of power. All I was really looking for, instead of holding altitude at that point, was just basically demonstrating and keeping that stall horn in that right above stalling speed scenario happening, and then just showing you the flight characteristics at that point.
Well, Glenn, I wanted to close asking you, because you talked a little bit about it, the approach itself. How did it feel, especially going into an airport that's not typical of some of the others that you see around here?
Well, again, the thing about the approach that was most unique is the view over the nose. You can see so much runway. You can see right down onto the numbers. And one of the things we talked about was that Rodney here was keeping me from pulling back a little bit too much on the stick, because it looked like I needed to enter a higher nose-up attitude. And so I just felt his hand there blocking me every now and then while I was pulling back, and figured, all right, and we just rode it in. But it was very nice. It seemed very straight, and even the differences in the controls, the feeling of the controls is very different than a standard aircraft. What training is used to, Cessnas and that sort of thing. It does feel very different, but it doesn't feel bad different. It just feels different. And I suppose that could translate to some people as bad right away, but obviously it didn't discourage me too much. Because, it didn't make me uncomfortable is what I'm saying. It was just different.
Every AirVenture has an Aeroshell Square main attraction, and you'd have to be blind to miss this year's. The Airbus Beluga loomed large as the centerpiece of the show. This outsized A300-600 is specially constructed to accommodate Airbus assembly components, satellites and helicopters. Arturo talked to Beluga Operations Director Captain Claude Christians in the front office of the mighty super transporter.
Captain, thank you for taking time to talk to us today. I think it's fair to say that the Beluga is the main highlight here on Aeroshell Square at the Whitman Regional Airport. We're glad you're here joining us for Oshkosh this year. Is this your first time in Oshkosh?
Yes, that's the first time in Oshkosh.
Have you been looking forward to this particular trip?
Yes, it's when we're riding the first one for landing, it's amazing that a lot of aircraft. It's the first time I see the lot of aircraft at the same place.
Let's talk about the Beluga specifically. How long well, first of all, let's talk about your role in the Beluga operation. What is your official title? What responsibilities do you have?
The responsibility of the operation, all the operation with the Beluga fleet in Toulouse, and we have 5 aircraft to operate.
You have 5 aircraft. How many crews do you have operating those aircraft?
We have 10 crews. That the crew is 2 pilots and 1 flight engineer. That means around 30 people.
What is the role of the Beluga at the moment for Airbus?
The role of Beluga for Airbus, the main role is around 80% is for the to take all the parts to build the Airbus in Toulouse and in Germany also. That means we have 80% this operation, then 20% for the third part, as here for the show, for the satellite, or for each kind of transport, for helicopter, for example, or something like that.
What is normally what do you carry in here? Is it mostly fuselages or wings?
Yes, we carry all the Airbus part now. That means if we have a A340, for example, it's the 3-step to transport the 340, the wings, the forward part and the rear part. And for the 320, it's 2 flight, etc., etc. That's it. All Airbus today are inside the Beluga for transport.
So I imagine, obviously you're flying quite a bit of weight. Do you have? Can you give us some idea of what typical payloads might weigh, or how much capacity-wise you're flying with?
The maximum payload for the aircraft is 47,000 kilograms, and the biggest one was a tank for a boat. That's you have the picture downstairs. That was around the maximum payload. And also that a lot of kind of helicopter and a lot of satellite also. That's amazing when you saw the aircraft going inside the Beluga.
Let's talk about the design. If I understand correctly, this is a highly modified A300-600. Is that correct?
Yes, it's based at the beginning for the A300-600 aircraft, passenger aircraft. Then they not cut, but it's cutting at the floor. Then they build the cargo parts just above the floor of the passenger aircraft. That's all the under parts. It's the wings, the gear, exactly the same as the 300-600.
How does it fly compared to a conventional A300-600?
That's the not big difference, a small difference. That, for example, we had the tape rating to have the qualification for the pilots and the flight engineer, and it's made on the 300-600 simulator. Then after we have only 2 flights to make the different parts. That means it's around 70 to 80% the same, and for the flight exactly the same also. That's a little bit difference in the role, but it's not it's very, very small difference.
Well, many of us will remember the Super Guppies, which were used to transport the different components for construction. When exactly did Airbus decide to go from the Super Guppy to the Beluga, and why did they choose to do that?
The difference first is approximately we have the double capacity, because the Super Guppy the floor is a little bit half floor than the Beluga, and the speed is around half speed, and the loading system, because the Guppy you have to move the door to disconnect all the cables here. We open the door, it's 2 minutes maximum. It's to have more efficacy and more time to transport, and because the Airbus production is going up, that's to have more capacity, it's to have the double capacity with the Beluga than the Super Guppy, and also the Super Guppy was old and we have to replace, so that's why the choice was made.